Winston Churchill famously said you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. What are some good examples that prove or disprove this quote's accuracy? Florida man stories can prove and disprove this. Florida man achieves full enlightenment. In the specific context of WW2, the British warned the US upon entering the war to adopt the convoy system for shipping. But the US refused to. Until they finally did, because shipping losses to submarines became too high. The British also told the USA that bombers would need to have a fighter escort or would suffer horrendous losses on bombing missions. But the USA sent bombers in without escorts because they were convinced that they were sufficiently capable of defending themselves. The USA suffered horrendous losses on bombing missions until they started sending fighter escorts to protect them. I believe the US Bomber Command believed that between the B-17 flying fortresses and the Norden bomb sites they could fly at high altitude away from AA, accurately drop bombs, and shoot down any German fighters that got close. OBV, it didn't quite work out that well. The Voting Rights Act. Civil Rights too. Not a great example, but another great quote by Otto von Bismarck: God has a special providence for fools, drunkards, and the United States of America, and ships called Enterprise. From WW2 itself. After Britain had spent quite some time learning through costly trial and error the methods of escorting merchant ships through U-boat infested waters, the US Naval Command, particularly one stubborn admiral whose name I can't recall, proceeded to ignore all their advice for weeks to months. Hundreds of tons of merchant shipping from the US were sunk due to insufficient escorts and convoy formations. WW2 stubborn admiral. 99.9% chance it's Admiral King. He did hate the British, but he hated everything to the point he might be related to Doom Guy. There is nothing more odd than teaching American history to non-American students. Tuesday, Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. Wednesday, slavery. All men are created equal. After that it's all up for grabs. Pass me a cigar and a large bottle of brandy, I'm gonna take you out prematurely like your family. WC. I'm the rhyme minister. Fresh in a hat and in a jacket. You look like a mix of Epic Lloyd and a Pringles packet. Winston Churchill. Democracy is the worst form of government except for all those other forms that have been tried. Long form. Many forms of government have been tried, and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. Winston S. Churchill. I believe Churchill attributed the quote to someone else but can't find a reference. Edit. I know this is slightly tangential to ARP's question, but I view it as Americans observed other states trying governmental forms, like monarchies, etc., and chose a right form. Wow. First award and it's a gold. Thank you, anonymous Reddit user. C.S. Lewis has some real gems. I am a Democrat, proponent of democracy, because I believe in the fall of man. I think most people are Democrats for the opposite reason. A great deal of democratic enthusiasm descends from the ideas of people like Rousseau, who believed in democracy because they thought mankind so wise and good that everyone deserved a share in the government. The danger of defending democracy on those grounds is that they're not true. I find that they're not true without looking further than myself. I don't deserve a share in governing a hen roost, much less a nation. Full stop. The real reason for democracy is just the reverse. Mankind is so fallen that no man can be trusted with unchecked power over his fellows. Aristotle said that some people were only fit to be slaves. I do not contradict him, but I reject slavery because I see no men fit to be masters. Disprove. Native American policy. Proof. Eventually saying duck it and going to war to end slavery. Actually, I disagree on the Civil War part. I'm not saying the war wasn't about slavery, but it was about slavery since the southern states seceded because of slavery. The Union did not invade the South to stop slavery. They invaded to keep the South from seceding. which they did because of slavery. Total agreement on the Native American part though. That was the first thing I thought of when I read the question. TBF, it probably applied just as much to him as it did to Americans. Well, he was 50% American himself. The Suez Canal crisis. An independent Egypt noted that the Suez Canal was in Egypt and nationalized it, paying all of the shareholders of the Suez Canal Company the current price of their holdings on the Paris Stock Exchange. Then the UK, Israel, and France invaded Egypt and seized the canal. The United States demanded they withdraw and threatened to sell all the US treasury as British bonds and wreck their economy. The US didn't blink. Just condemned close allies for imperialistic behavior and threatened serious action to stop them. After which they withdrew. After this humiliation, the British and French empires gradually fell apart, and two allies against communism were greatly weakened. But it was the right thing to do, implying that it wasn't a strategic move to weaken the British. We didn't side with Germany in WWI. Edit. Let's all stop fighting over this. I have my own opinions and you have yours. Many Irish and Germans American wanted America to side with Germany in WWI. Germany was the second most popular language in America until it was oppressed in the mid-1930s. Reminds me of this story, not sure if it's true or not, where this American soldier is returning from a war and can't find a seat. Eventually they find a seat being occupied by a woman's dog. He asks her to move the dog and she refuses multiple times. So he throws the dog out of the window. Then this British guy turns around and says, "You Americans get everything wrong. You use a fork with the wrong hand. You drive on the wrong side of the road and now you've gone and thrown the wrong bee out of the window." God, that is funny. Why does this sound like someone's homework assignment? Edit. Would love to see one of those YouTube channels make a video about this thread with the robot voice and the incredibly long answers. Just give it some time. OP is in the process of trying all the wrong things first before realizing that he should be doing his own homework assignment himself. Just a couple of months ago, the wife of an American diplomat held a 19-year-old biker in the UK and then ran for the hills. She has to answer for what she did. Killed a 19-year-old. Told the police she wouldn't leave the country so she didn't get detained. And then immediately left anyway. Who would have thought that a diplomat's wife was untrustworthy? Bear in mind that when this happened to the US citizen, the country in question, I think Georgia, waived their diplomat's immunity. And he was sentenced to 10 years in prison in the US. But when the shoe is on the other foot, they don't have to play by the established rules. Americans like me sometimes accidentally do the right thing. So I think this applies less to Americans, rather than the human race as a whole. Probably yet another thing Churchill never said. It's quite easy to make a Churchill quote. All you have to do is say something sassy in the right way. Winston Churchill. The fact that they don't use the metric system. Who needs it when we have freedom units? Winston Churchill was also a profound racist and warmonger. Couldn't really give a shit what he has to say about us. It's not meant to be accurate. It's meant to prove a point. Disprove? M1 Garand. It wasn't the best infantry rifle we could have picked, but it was good enough and we could mass produce it enough. We were fully equipped with the main battle rifle 10 years ahead of everyone else in WW2. Tariff China and call on American companies to not do business there. Say what you will about the trade war and effectiveness of tariffs, but let me pitch this. How much have you seen goods increase in price in the US over the past 2 years? Because inflation has remained at a historic low of about 2.4%. Meaning relative to pay. Goods haven't really changed. Jobs have continued to grow. The stock market hasn't collapsed. etc. While in China the stock market has halved. Exports are down significantly. Jobs have moved out of the country. People have been forced to close their businesses due to lost sales. Private debt forfeitures have increased steadily. etc. China is feeling this trade war whereas the vast majority of Americans aren't. I'd love to see other countries push back on them as well. America gives more money to foreign countries than anyone. Someone got an essay due tonight? America passed a constitutional amendment to ban the sale and production of alcohol. Then they passed an amendment to reverse it after they realized they ducked up. The Civil War. They tried every kind of compromise to avoid a war and finally it was a war that settled it. Churchill also asked a woman one time if she would sleep with him for $1 million. She said of course I would. He then asked would you sleep with me for $50? She replied Mr. Churchill, what kind of woman do you think I am? He responded with, that has already been established. Now we're just trying to figure out a price. The good old USA banned pretty much everybody from Asia and the Asian Pacific from attaining full citizenship for ages, with some of the big examples being the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and the Immigration Act of 1924. Then in the 1950s, the Soviets pointed out how hostile Americans were towards Asia. And suddenly the federal government had a completely different outlook regarding them. They only stopped being racist against Asians on an institutional level because it would help slow the spread of communism. Not because racism is a bad thing. I can't think of example that proves it slightly wrong. During Bangladesh Liberation War in 1971, you can read about why. But just wanted to include. It was not like a communist revolution and Bangladesh was seeking to be a secular democracy. The United States took the side of then West Pakistan, now Pakistan, despite it being a very repressive regime and the Pakistani army committing genocide and genocidal rape during the war. The United States government was fully aware of it. American diplomat Archer Blood informed the government to the extent of the genocide through what is now called the Blood Telegram. To this day, the government of Pakistan does not recognize this and neither does the United States. Pardon me for my stupidity, but this sounds more like disproving it by saying that they didn't even try anything else after doing what I suppose was the wrong thing. The opioid overdose epidemic. Pharma companies and doctors pushed these opioid painkillers like there was no tomorrow. Everyone got hooked. They said oh no, this is wrong, and cut back dramatically on their prescribing practices. The right thing to do? I'm not sure. This fueled demand for more opioids and subsequently fentanyl analogs flooded the streets. Usually disguised as in heroin. Since all these folks fell in love with their opioids they got what they could. And with the nuance of the battle many have lost their lives. People might blame the users, which I don't completely disagree with. However, if the demand was never increased by social acceptance of the pharmaceuticals, we would not be in this extreme of a position today. America has done the right thing multiple times, but they have never launched 30,000 pounds of sheet into orbit and then shot it down with a laser. Just the fact that that scenario remains unexplored means America hasn't tried everything else. I don't wish to insult those affected, but the fact that America, I don't remember logistics. I just remember it happened, rejected advice from Australia during that huge fire recently. Australia firefighters who deal with fires as severe as that one almost every year. Of course, They came back later and accepted the advice, which helped. The current NSW fires are not a reflection of the ability of the Australian fire response, rather of the lack of funding and support from our government. Iran. First, you remove a democratic elected and probably Western friendly, possibly long-term stable president to reinstate the Shah, who ruled with terror and created the basis for a long-term enemy. This was all to secure oil. Probably lots of oil. Which was and still is very important. Reinstating the Shah showed a lack of vision. Then you support Saddam Hussein, another man of great stature, to start a war against Iran that costs many billions and many lives. But most of that money flows back to American weapon manufacturers. And those lives are not American, so who cares? Oh, and cheap oil. That war is lost or not won. But at least Iran is set back another decade or two. And Iraq is still more dependent on the US. Now you've got an Iran that is out of control. Although I still think the people of Iran are still reasonable, rather liberal and friendly people, friendly to the West as well. But well, that doesn't matter. So you retract from the nuclear treaty so you know for sure that those nuclear bombs are coming. Verdict: the US probably haven't run out of stupid ideas. And certainly haven't done the right thing here.